So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everyone's charged up after the break. We are Team 4, as you already might know. So, we would be presenting our short case about the severe effects of floods on the supply chain networks, specifically targeting the city of Bangkok. Also, as it title says, in this presentation, we would be proposing a business continuity plan to ensure that our firm or company continues to function even in this detrimental situation. Next slide, please. To start with, I would like to give a short summary about what our case is. Firstly, uh, the case highlights the catastrophic situation that floods caused in Bangkok in the year 2011, especially on the manufacturing sector. As you can see in the picture, a plant located in the industrial sector of North Bangkok, which is completely drowned underwater. Nextly, it explains the adverse effects of floods on the supply chain networks, which created an extremely unfavorable condition for trade, as you can imagine. Next, it presents the challenges which the industries had to overcome to survive this disastrous condition, may it be financial or resource management. And lastly, in such situation, most of the enterprises found it very difficult to rise up from the losses incurred. So there are numerous examples presented in this case about how the major industries created resiliency. Next slide. So what the problem statement is, we are newly recruited as supply chain specialists by an Singaporean firm with an intention to expand its business in Southeast Asia. This firm buys or takes over a company in Bangkok, which was initially forced to close down due to its operations due to the calamity. Now, the challenge before us here is to know the impact of flood on the business operations, identify risks associated with the supply chain, find solutions or ways to mitigate this risk, and over in all, prepare a business continuity plan so that in future, like even if such situation occurs, the company can continue operating without being shut down. Uh, to continue, like we've assumed certain things, as you can read. So the Singaporean firm is a major consumer electronics OEM, which, as I said, has occupied a new company in Bangkok. It plans to produce hard drives at this location, and hence there will be a manufacturing and assembly line setup. Other infrastructures like research and development centers, sales office, and a small warehouse will also be constructed. The plant's capacity would be to produce about 1,000 hard drives per day, and the expected annual turnover would be around $10 million. And the rest details are about the company's inventories. Next slide. The methodology. So, how do we approach these problems? Well, there isn't a very specific model that addresses the solution. So, we've adopted an open source model. So, firstly, we start with the generic idea of the business continuity plan, which would include the impact analysis, then the analysis of major issues, or as we say, risk identification, followed by risk analysis and the risk mitigation strategy, and finally we would end with conclusion explaining how the continuity plan would help the organization in sustaining its operations. Next slide. Business continuity plan, what exactly is a business continuity plan, or what is the goal of it? It basically outlines how a business will continue operating during an unplanned disruption in service. So is it similar to a disaster recovery plan? Well, kind of yes. But in some sense, it's more comprehensive than a disaster recovery plan, as it contains contingencies for business processes, assets, customers, and business or supply chain partners. Like it covers every single aspect of business that might be affected. Here are the steps that are included in the business continuity plan, and I've already discussed about it in the methodology, which we would also be discussing in detail in the upcoming slides. Um, Click. As you can see in the graph, I mean, it's the sad truth being after the disaster, you don't perform as well as you did before in the long term. majorly because of the shareholder value or additional cost. The earlier, it's always better to introduce the preventive measures faster and react immediately in case of disaster. Like the more agile and flexible these measures are, the better and faster one can cope up with the situation. So this is why we can say that supply chain agility and flexibility is moderating the disaster performance. So over to you, Siddharth.
Yeah. So now I'll discuss the impact of this flood that was there. So around 7 industrial streets were drowned, and 930 factories were closed down, and around 380,000 workers were affected, and summing up to the economic loss of US dollar 32 billion. And it also had impact in the supply chain networks. Like thousands of trucks were left stranded on the roads, and the global supply of hard drives fell by 30% during that period. And in the Bangkok, it was down by 42%. So the challenges that are faced by those industries after the flood happened was how to rebuild the infrastructure that they had, the factory, the machineries, everything, and how to regain the trust of the customers so that they start rebuying, and also how to rebuild and restructure the logistic networks so that in the future these calamities or other disasters does not affect the supply. Yeah, so here we'll analyze the major issues. So there was an operational loss. So it was because of these three factors. The inbound logistics were hampered, the outbound logistics were hampered, and the production was also interrupted because of flood. So inbound logistics was mainly affected by the public infrastructure that was destroyed, roads and everything, and the parts and product that were missing and destroyed that were inside the factory, and the communication, telecom, and other communication channels that were stalled. So, and outbound logistics was hampered by the parts they were missing, and also the communication, and mainly the production that was interrupted. It was because of communication. The material was damaged. The equipment that handled the material were damaged. The machines were in the shop floor were damaged, and auxiliary supplies like electricity, water, and they were lacking in the factory, and there was shortage of labor because of transportation and conveyance. So mainly the communication that was halted was due to flood destroyed the radio towers, and the papers that were there, they were unreadable or destroyed or withered, and the computers which stored data, they were malfunctioning because of water and flood. So uh, we will now discuss the risk mitigation strategy uh, with respect to the supply risk that we have. Supply risk is mainly due to the financial instability of the supply. The production is slow on the part of supply, and also the distribution network is weak from the supply. So we'll compare it in a graph with component price and financial impact as the. So when the financial impact is high and the component price is low, so we have to stock up the inventory, and we have to keep dual sourcing of raw materials and labor so that we can switch from one to another when one is affected. And also we have to take the outside scope using the measure of flexibility to improve our performance. Yeah, next. Now we'll compare with when the component price is high and the flexibility is also high. This measure is usually taken for the components that are coming from the single suppliers. So here we have to take a long-term partnership with the supplier so that the product keeps on coming, and also we have to effect uh, we have to get a supply contract that is effective so that the risk is shared by both the parties, and also operational and financial performance have to be shared with the supplier, that should be tracked, and the experience should also be shared so that we can share each other's experience and then work on it. Yeah, next. And then we'll compare the component price and the financial impact. Both are low here. So to ensure continuous supply here, uh, we don't have to consider large portion of the product cost, but we have to get an uninterrupted supply, and that can be risky. So we'll either stock up inventory, or we can have longer term contracts with the supplier, or we can have both. Yeah. So there are two main risk mitigation strategies. One is flexibility, and the other is redundancy. In flexibility, we take an outside scope. So here we take a step back and think about and explore other options before making the decision. So uh, there should be like we should act smart here, and we should have interchangeable parts and products. We should use the pull strategy. We should explore other options in the supply chain also.
Some went to locations that they rented out, and some went to government-owned facilities, like, for example, at the airport. Many used multi-sourcing strategies. Some already had the infrastructure for that already set up, and some adopted new suppliers. There was one retailer who went into the public transportation system in order to supply his products. And there was one who aligned the strategy with the supplier to deliver directly to the customer. There was also one who worked together with their competitors in order to ship to the flooded regions. In the cases of redundancy, it was mostly about using spare capacities in other locations, for example, in China. There was one special mention where the employees in Austria donated their wages to their Thai colleagues in order to help them out. We, of course, would like to hope for that kind of support, but we would definitely use the relocation strategy in the worst case scenario. We would like to use multi sourcing, and we would work together with other companies, not necessarily our competitors, but maybe also from other industries and who are also affected in our area. And we also want to use spare capacities. So with that, we would like to introduce our recommendations for our preventive measures in our risk mitigation strategy. We should first make an evacuation plan for our employees and look for a secondary location where we can set up in the worst case scenario. We would install sealed doors also on our machines and strengthen our walls of the building, for example, with steam bills, and build a dam around it. We would like to move all our machines to the first floor, every machines that we can move, and we would regularly test our evacuation plans. We need to set up alternative communication channels in the case that the phone and the Wi-Fi is disrupted. And we want to build a good relationship with our local emergency responses, so with police, ambulance, firefighters. We want to have backup personnel trained so that we can start up immediately after case. We need therefore have the contact information of all of them. We need to build trust with our employees so that they can also trust us in the emergency. We need to review this plan regularly to add changes. We want to outsource our operations that need to stay on the ground to others, for example, punching. We want to have 2 or 3 distributors in South Asia who can distribute worldwide and who would also have our outbound stock, so that our plant would only keep an inventory of about 1 day. The same is for the inbound logistics. So we want to have our vendors manage our inventory so as much as possible stay with them. We would constantly monitor our water levels, and we would diversify our logistics fleet to also cargo boats and not just trucks. We want to multi-source from redundant suppliers, also from nearby countries in case all of Thailand is affected by the flood, and keep contact with surrounding companies to align our emergency plans. Next to our reactive, the first action would definitely be to close all the waterproof doors. That goes hand in hand with evacuating all the employees. As soon as everyone is evacuated, we should contact them and including the reserve personnel to get with the job rotation and to start the operation as soon as possible. In general, as soon as the water level rises, we should produce at full capacity in every location to increase our inventory everywhere. So last, our conclusion. These are the effects that we will have when we use all the when we introduce all the preventive measures. We will have a stronger partnership with our external stakeholders. We will have reduced financial losses during the catastrophes. We have improved stakeholder confidence. We will have a better foresight so that we were ready for the disaster, and we have a reduced inventory. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions left, my team colleagues will be happy to answer.